Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking some absolutely fascinating philosophical arguments from Bediüzzaman Said Nursi's Treatise on Nature. We want to zero in on a very specific and frankly, very bold claim, the idea that nature made it. The concept that natural laws themselves are the creative agents responsible for the universe. And to make this really concrete, we're going to take these century-old philosophical concepts and put them head-to-head with some incredible modern science.
To ground us right from the start, let's take a look at a central quote from Nursi's text. He argues that if the wise, purposeful art and creation seen in living beings is not attributed to a conscious creator, or as he puts it, the pen of divine decree and power, but instead to a blind, deaf, mindless nature, well, then logically, nature would have to pack boundless spiritual factories into every single thing. It's a pretty intense thought, right? But it perfectly sets the stakes for the arguments we're about to dive into.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the claim of nature and then walk through three distinct logical impossibilities. Impossibility 1, infinite gods. Impossibility 2, nanofactories. And impossibility 3, blind laws. After that, we'll wrap it all up with the final conclusion.
All right, starting off with section 1, the claim of nature, where we analyze the core premise.
Which brings us to section 2, impossibility 1. Infinite gods, and why nature itself cannot create.
Nursi uses this classic analogy that actually translates beautifully to modern science. Think about the sun and mirrors. If you're looking at the sun's reflection in thousands of tiny water droplets, and you refuse to attribute those reflections to a single sun up in the sky, you'd basically have to believe that a tiny real sun exists inside every single droplet. It's absurd, right? Well, he argues that the exact same logic applies to the perfect order we see in living beings. Let's look at this through the lens of the electromagnetic spectrum. The sun emits a staggering amount of energy, like 3.8 times 10 to the 26 power joules every single second. Now think about life on Earth. Plants are perfectly tuned to use a very specific wavelength of that light for photosynthesis. Meanwhile, our skin uses a completely different wavelength to synthesize vitamin D, and our eyes, they use yet another range just so we can see. So Nursi's argument poses a fantastic question here. How are three completely different biological systems perfectly tuned to one single distant source? Is that really just a cosmic coincidence, or does it point to intentional design?
And we can see another brilliant modern parallel to this idea of intentional design when we look at CRISPR-Cas9. If you weren't familiar, CRISPR is a precision gene editing technology that actually won the 2020 Nobel Prize. It basically finds a specific DNA region, cuts it, and inserts a brand new sequence with a mind-blowing 1 in a billion margin of error. It really acts like a modern-day mirror, reflecting this immense, deeply intentional design.
Just think about the steps involved here. CRISPR was originally discovered as a bacterial immune system that had been shaped over time. Then, it was consciously redesigned by scientists using guide RNA and the Cas9 enzyme to navigate and edit DNA with incredible precision. So, applying Nursi's philosophical framework prompts a pretty huge question. If a highly precise tool like this requires brilliant scientists to utilize it, how on earth could a blind nature alone act as the original mind behind the tool in the first place?
Let's move to and see how this builds into section 3. Impossibility 2, nanofactories and localized production.
Nursi uses another really striking analogy here, this time regarding soil and factories. Imagine you plant a rose seed, a tulip seed, and an apple seed in the exact same bowl of soil. If nature is doing the creating, as some claim, then Nursi argues that this single patch of dirt must literally contain separate manufacturing factories for every single plant. To put that in perspective, that's essentially like cramming all of Europe's industrial capacity into one little bowl of dirt.
Just look at the sheer wonder of a tiny pine seed. We are talking about something that is only about 5 millimeters long, yet under the right conditions, this little speck transforms into a massive 50-meter-tall tree. It doesn't just contain raw matter, it contains a complete, working, hyper-complex plan.
Inside that 5-millimeter seed, the DNA encodes the entire blueprint of the tree. It specifies branch thickness, how tall it will grow, and it literally builds the photosynthesis factories inside the leaves post-germination. The soil? The soil is just a raw material depot. According to Nursi, the seed's DNA acts as a highly complex factory blueprint, which implies that the mind that actually wrote that blueprint has to exist completely outside of the soil itself.
We actually see this concept even more clearly inside our own bodies when we look at epigenetics. Epigenetics involves chemical marks that determine which of our 20,000 to 25,000 human genes are turned on or off. And the crazy part? It does this without changing the underlying DNA sequence at all. It perfectly demonstrates how a single code can create vastly different outputs.
Consider this. All 37 trillion cells in your body share the exact same identical DNA. Yet, epigenetic marks dictate that light-sensing genes turn on in your eye, while metabolic genes turn on in your liver. The source text poses a really powerful question here. Who exactly is switching these genes on and off? Narcini argues that nature is just a conceptual term. It isn't a physical, active hand capable of flipping these incredibly complex molecular switches.
Moving right along to Section 4, Impossibility 3, Blind Laws, and the crucial difference between describing a process and actually creating it.
Mercy illustrates this concept with the analogy of a primitive man who wanders into a magnificent, fully furnished palace right in the middle of a desert. The man walks around and finds a rulebook that lists the palace's architectural plans. But because he doesn't know any better, he mistakenly concludes that the paper rulebook itself somehow magically built the structure.
And this brilliantly illustrates Narcisi's ultimate conclusion about natural laws. To quote him directly here, "It is a pattern, not the designer. It is a set of laws, not the lawgiver. It is a created veil, not the creator. It is a law, not a power." Think about it. A rule book cannot apply its own rules. Natural laws do a beautiful job of describing how the universe works, but they completely lack the conscious, physical power to actually construct it.
Let's apply this logic to nanotechnology. This is the manipulation of matter at the nanometer scale. We're talking 1 to 100 nanometers, to produce conscious designs like microscopic motors and pumps. The 2016 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was actually awarded for designing these incredibly tiny molecular machines.
So humans have managed to design artificial nanomotors and even protein cages that act as pumps for targeted drug delivery. It's amazing stuff. Yet the biological nanomachines found naturally inside us remain incomparably superior to our absolute best human designs. The logical extension presented in the text is pretty straightforward. If our primitive, human-made nanomachines strictly require conscious, intelligent designers, shouldn't far superior biological nanomachines also require a designer?
Just take ATP synthase as an example. This is a biological motor inside your cells that spans a mere 10 nanometers. But get this, it physically spins at an astonishing 9,000 revolutions per minute.
It basically operates just like a microscopic water wheel. A flow of protons rotates the FO component, and then the F1 component slowly and deliberately converts that rotation into chemical energy. It churns out about 3 ATP per revolution, totaling roughly 40 kilograms of ATP in your body every single day. Paul Boyer and John Walker won the 1997 Nobel Prize for discovering this exact mechanism. And it begs the ultimate question. Could a blind, unconscious law really craft a physical, rotary motor of such mind-bending efficiency?
So the crucial point is, well, let's get into it in Section 5, the final conclusion, synthesizing everything we've just covered.
It is truly remarkable to see all this laid out side by side. As you can see, Narcisi's historical philosophical arguments map perfectly onto our most complex modern biological discoveries. The sun and mirror analogy flawlessly predicts the tuning of the electromagnetic spectrum and the precision of CRISPR. The soil and factory analogy captures the absolute mystery of epigenetics, and the palace in the wilderness perfectly frames the deep philosophical questions raised by nanotechnology and ATP synthase.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question posed by the source material. As we continue to peel back the layers of scientific discovery, and as we uncover increasingly complex, microscopic machinery, is the universe truly driven by the blind, death laws of nature, or is it the masterpiece of a conscious lawgiver? I'll leave that one for you to ponder. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.